We're letting him go next week. My name's Kevin Matthews. I'm 34, and for the past 3 years I've worked in quality control at North Peak Engineering. Those words hit me like a splash of ice water spoken in Mandarin by my manager, Greg Lin, to our visiting CEO Hengi, in what they assumed was a private break room conversation. They had no idea I was standing just outside the door, and they definitely didn't know I understood every single word.
Right.
With that. Shanghai as a teenager when my father worked for an automotive supplier. Those years didn't just give me the language, they taught me patience. How to observe, how to listen, and how to wait until the timing was perfect. That morning, Greg had told me to train our new hire, Jacob Torres, who was starting Monday. Fresh engineering, graduate, eager, and willing to work for less than I earned. I should have connected the dots. The hints had been there for months. Greg subtly dismissing my points in meetings, cutting me out of client calls, and slipping more Mandarin into office discussions as if it were some private shield. Back at my desk, sat staring through the glass partition at the manufacturing floor, humming beneath ooze machines, cutting precision parts for Detroit's automotive industry. I'd personally streamlined half those processes, saving the company nearly $200,000 last year alone. Yet Greg was preparing to show me the door. I pulled up the training plan he'd sent for Jacob. It was thorough, 3 weeks of deep system. Access, payroll, quality metrics, client database, is everything I knew about North Peak's operations. He wanted me to hand over my knowledge like a wrapped gift, then quietly disappear. The sensible move might have been to polish my resume, start job hunting, maybe confront Greg directly. But something about the smug way he'd said those words in Mandarin stuck with me. I typed a reply, happy to help Jacob get up to speed. I'll make sure he learns everything. When I glanced up, Greg was watching from his office. He gave a little approving nod, unaware that language fluency worked both ways. That evening, I stayed late. Instead of processing quality reports, I began combing through access logs and permissions. Anything that might clarify what Greg had been up to while I'd been busy doing my job. The more I found, the clearer it became. My firing was only the surface. I'd always been the dependable one, covering 6 shifts, working weekends under tight deadlines, fixing client relationships because I could explain technical problems. Plainly, my father had been the same at his plant, in Vancouver loyal, even when it cost him. At 16, I watched him train his own replacement, believing his dedication would be rewarded. 6 months later, they laid him off. I swore I'd never let that happen to me. Yet here I was, walking the same road. Greg had once been my mentor. Fresh out of college, he'd shown me the ropes, connected me to key suppliers, and given me growing responsibility. But 2 years ago, after the Chinese acquisition, things began to shift. Greg had more closed-door talks with Hengi, always in Mandarin, excluding the team. Then came the quiet undermining, rejecting my vendor proposal that would have cut costs. 15% taking credit for catching a flaw that could have caused a recall. Reassigning meaningful projects to less experienced engineers. When Jacob toured the plant pre-hire, Greg showed him around with a level of enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. I chalked it up to normal competition until I heard that. Conversation in the break room, Greg's plan was almost elegant. Have me train Jacob, ensure nothing fell apart, then terminate me under the banner of efficiency. Clean and professional, with no obvious wrongdoing. But he didn't know I could see the real picture. Thursday morning, I overheard him on a call with HR, this time in English, talking severance packages and my transition. that stripped away the heat of my anger and left me with something sharper: clarity. Greg had been slowly sidelining me, transferring my relationships and responsibilities to others, building his case for redundancy. What he hadn't accounted for was my ability to understand, his private Mandarin exchanges and my access to systems he thought I'd never touch. That afternoon, I started digging into North Peak's financial operations: payroll, expenses, vendor payments, everything. The picture that emerged was damning: fake vendor invoices, bogus expense reports, charges for trips that never happened. Small amounts each time, but over 2 years, they added up to serious money. And it wasn't just theft. Greg was angling for a regional operations role overseeing multiple facilities, which would give him even more room to maneuver financially. My termination wasn't about cost-cutting, it was about eliminating the one person with both the access and skill to catch him. Jacob arrived Monday, bright-eyed and ready to learn. I followed Greg's training outline to the letter while quietly probing his weak points. In a meeting midweek, I mentioned discrepancies in vendor invoices. Greg shut me down instantly, telling me to stick to engineering. But the way he fidgeted told me I'd hit a nerve. Then Jacob let something slip. Greg had recruited him personally, valuing not only his engineering degree, but his Mandarin fluency and experience in Beijing. Suddenly, Greg's long-term play snapped into focus. Jacob wasn't just cheaper, he was Greg's future bridge to Chinese leadership, a carefully chosen accomplice. The second week confirmed everything. I unearthed payment records tied to non-existent vendors and equipment that had never shown up. By my estimate, Greg had skimmed around $300,000 since the acquisition, ramping up after each of Hongyi's visits, but Greg miscalculated Jacob's character. He was honest and increasingly uneasy about what he was seeing. That gave me my opening. I spent the weekend compiling an airtight evidence package: financial records, emails, payroll manipulation, proof of systematic isolation. Ready for the right moment, by midweek, Greg's timeline got compressed. Hongyi moved his visit up. Greg called me on Wednesday, framing my termination as a restructuring for efficiency. I kept my expression neutral, thanked him for the notice, and asked if I could present quality initiatives to Hongyi before leaving. Greg shut that down fast, insisting all communication go through him. Perfect. Thursday morning, I waited until Greg and Hongyi were deep in their private strategy session. Then I knocked, folder in hand. Greg opened the door, irritated, till I switched to perfect Mandarin. "Mr. Huang, I have some financial irregularities we need to discuss." The air in the room shifted instantly. Hongyi's surprise was matched only by Greg's shock. I laid it all out in Mandarin, citing the exact conversations where Greg planned my firing and discussed expanding his control. Then I handed over the evidence: $300,000 in fraud, fake vendors, personal accounts, unauthorized bonuses, in less than 4 hours. Greg was escorted out, his accounts frozen, and criminal charges initiated. 3 months later, he pled guilty. Earning for years in prison and financial ruin, Hongyi offered me Greg's job with a raise, which I accepted with strict financial oversight measures in place. 6 months later, standing in the same conference room where Greg's scheme collapsed, I looked down at the manufacturing floor and realized something. Fluency isn't just knowing the words. It's knowing when to listen, when to speak, and when silence makes you complicit.